Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what could be the most significant development we've seen in the war in Iran. Over the last 24 hours, President Trump, senior US officials, and a number of international governments have announced that a peace agreement has been reached in principle between the USA and Iran, with a formal signing expected by the end of this week. The proposed agreement includes a halt to the fighting, a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, and a 60-day period during which both sides will continue negotiations on a range of outstanding issues. And the financial markets have responded immediately. Oil prices have fallen sharply, stock markets are moving higher, investors are now celebrating. And the general feeling seems to be that the worst is now behind us. But is it? Because whilst there's undoubtedly a lot of good news in today's announcement, there's also some bad news. The economic damage caused by this conflict doesn't simply disappear overnight. Oil prices remain significantly higher than they were at the start of this year. Inflationary pressures remain embedded throughout the global economy. And perhaps most importantly of all, when we step back and ask why this war started in the first place, it isn't entirely clear that those issues have actually been resolved. So in today's video, we'll go through exactly what's been announced, why the markets are celebrating, what the economic consequences are likely to be, and perhaps the biggest question of all, what has actually been achieved? But before we get into the details on all of that, if I could ask anyone that hasn't subscribed yet to please hit that subscribe button. It really does help me with the algorithm and also puts a smile on my face. And if you can give me a thumbs up for this video, it will also help with this video, and maybe even hype it if you know what hyping is. If it appears next to the video, press hype, and that basically boosts the chances of the algorithm promoting this video a bit more. So let's get into the details. The immediate market reaction to the announcement has been overwhelmingly positive. The Strait of Hormuz appears to be reopened immediately. Shipping routes are returning to normal. The risk of further disruption to global energy supplies has reduced dramatically, and oil prices have fallen back towards $80 per barrel after spending prolonged periods much closer to $100 over the past few months. For consumers, businesses, and governments around the world, that is unquestionably good news. However, I think it's important to keep those numbers in perspective. At the beginning of this year, oil was trading at around $60 per barrel. Today, it's sitting at around $80. So whilst prices have fallen significantly from their recent highs, they remain approximately a third higher than they were at the start of this year. And that's important because the global economy today is weaker than it was 6 months ago. Growth has slowed, manufacturing activity has weakened, consumer confidence has deteriorated, investment has slowed, and under normal circumstances, a weaker economy would result in lower oil prices, less than $60, not higher ones. The fact that oil remains elevated despite weaker economic activity tells us that the effects of this conflict are still very much present. And that's before we even begin to talk about inflation. Every increase in energy feeds directly through into transport costs, manufacturing costs, food production, aviation, logistics, and ultimately household bills. Businesses have already absorbed those higher costs, many have already increased their prices, and many have signed contracts based on those higher prices for the rest of this year. Those inflationary pressures won't disappear simply because a ceasefire has been announced. There's a lag effect, and that lag is likely to continue affecting economies throughout the rest of this year. Which brings us to a bigger question. Why did this war actually happen? The publicly stated objective from both the United States and Israel was Iran's nuclear program. The argument was that Iran was moving closer to producing a nuclear weapon through uranium enrichment, and that action needed to be taken to prevent that from happening. That was the central justification of the conflict. But if we look at what's been announced so far, there doesn't appear to be a final settlement regarding Iran's nuclear program. There doesn't appear to be an agreement on uranium enrichment, and there isn't any sort of statement about future nuclear inspections. And there's nothing to talk about a permanent solution to the issue that was presented as the main reason for the conflict. Similarly, Iran has long argued that it wants sanctions relief and access to assets that have been frozen overseas. It's talking about $12 billion worth of assets. That issue also appears to remain unresolved. So when you take a step back, you're left with an interesting question. Are we actually further forward today than we were before this conflict began? And I think the answer to that is complicated. The fighting may be ending, the shipping disruption is coming to a close, and the immediate threat to global energy supplies looks like they're over. These are all positive developments, but the fundamental disagreement that led to the conflict appears to have been deferred rather than resolved. And that's why I think it's important not to confuse a ceasefire with a permanent solution. A ceasefire stops the shooting, a solution removes the reason for the shooting in the first place. And at this stage, it isn't entirely clear that we've reached that point, which leads to the question that many people are now asking: was it all worth it? The conflict has cost thousands of lives, caused significant damage across the whole of the Middle East, has disrupted global trade and pushed up energy prices, which in turn have pushed up inflation, and has contributed to a slowdown in the economic activity around the whole of the world. If the end result is simply a 60-day ceasefire and an agreement to continue negotiating the same issues that existed before the war began, then history may ultimately ask whether the objectives justified the cost. Of course, supporters of the agreement will argue that military pressure forced both sides back to the negotiating table, but critics argue that the world has suffered enormous economic damage only to arrive back at the exact same position where we were to start with, and that's likely to remain a debate for many years to come. For investors, however, the immediate focus is much simpler. The risk of a wider regional conflict has now reduced, the Strait of Hormuz is looking to reopen shortly, and oil prices are moving lower. So stock markets are responding very positively to that. And that is the good news. The bad news is that the economic consequences of the last few months are unlikely to disappear anytime soon, and the underlying issues that triggered the conflict may be waiting to be resolved. So I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments as and when they occur, but I wanted to post this video because it's obviously big news. Hopefully you found today's video useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, or maybe didn't like it, but you thought it was interesting, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Don't forget, I recently launched Joe Blogs Russia, so if you're interested just in my Russian content, that's the place to go. There's a link at the end of today's video. Please subscribe and watch some of the videos. Joe and Naz is also live. This is very different, a bit more light-hearted, a bit more fun. So if you're looking for a change of pace, check those videos out. We need your support because it's very early stages. We don't have many subscribers. So if you could go and subscribe and watch some of the videos, that would be fantastic.